Hello, everyone. Huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on is infrastructure as code still fit for purpose? This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Harness. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the technical strategy channel. We may also have some time to answer questions live, so please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll either get to them if we can slot them into the flow of our discussion, or we're going to have some time at the end. But first, let's get started with some introductions. I'm George Hanzaros, and today I'm joined by Hila, Jackie, Martin, and Aise, who will kindly be sharing their experiences and their insights. And I'll now ask to introduce yourself. Let's get started with Aisha.
Hi everyone, my name is Aisha. I'm currently head of platform security at a company called Dentsu. I lead a team of security engineers, and my background includes security operations, security engineering, cloud security engineering, and now leading a team. Yeah, I'm really excited about this panel. I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you, Aisha. Next up is Martin.
Hi, yeah, I'm Martin Reynolds. I'm field CTO at Harness. My background, I mean, I was many years ago, I was a coder, but probably before I joined Harness a year ago, I was running the DevOps and infrastructure as a service teams in an ISV, which I did for 13 years, and saw a good evolution in exactly what we're talking about today.
Thank you, Martin. Hila.
Hi everyone, I'm Hila Fish. I'm a senior DevOps engineer. Started my journey as a system admin and I had an evolution towards DevOps practices and methodologies. AWS community builder, HashiCorp ambassador. So if I talk about Terraform, would probably put more emphasis on Terraform than OpenTofu. Sorry, I'm an ambassador. Really believe in infrastructure as code. It helped us so much, and I'm happy to have this panel to discuss it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Hila. Our fourth panelist is having some technical difficulties to join us at the moment. Jackie will join us as we flow through the discussion. So today we're coming here to try and answer the question, is infrastructure as code still fit for purpose? And without a doubt, whether the answer to this question is yes or no. Over this last years, our infrastructure and our infrastructure management practices have changed significantly. So let's start by understanding how our needs, tools, and practices have evolved. And then we're going to see how those practices and limitations have evolved as well, and finally answer our question. I would like to start with ICE and kind of on the architectural side, we've seen adoption of native architectures, an approach treating environments and infrastructure as ephemeral. How have those architectural changes impacted our infrastructure as code needs?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk a little bit about, how the cloud adoption changed and moved into cloud native environments, where sometimes organizations have this hybrid approach as well, where they had the legacy approach they had to lift and shift into cloud, as well as they start coding and building applications in cloud. So the entirety of the architecture is hosted within, all the way to hybrid clouds, depending on the size of the organization. So all this variations bring us, challenges in dealing with and trying to find one recipe that may fit all, which this is not necessarily the case. So how has it impacted our IAC approach to IAC is that we now need to look at utilizing infrastructure as code for both ephemeral and dynamic environments. And we need to try and find the balance between the two. So, for example, applications within Kubernetes environments and with the dynamic nature of that that we need to deal with within with IAC, i.e. Terraform that we need to use. So the dilemma between declarative and imperative ways of dealing with the desired state also comes into focus. IAC needs to fit within our CI/CD pipelines and development pipelines, needs to sit close to developers, etc. From a security point of view, which is where I specialize in, obviously, what I really focus on is how can we make sure that security is within infrastructure as code from all the way to the left as possible. How do we ensure that we deal with secrets within it, etc.? Can we bring in any regulation, standardization policies that we can enforce on infrastructure as code that can later on provide that secure by design architectures and infrastructure for us?
Thank you, Aisha.
Mhm.
And on the one hand, we have all of these kind of cloud architectural changes. And the last couple of years, we also see a huge rise in platform engineering and internal developer platforms as kind of ways to build the DevOps organization at scale. So Martin, how do you see platform engineering affecting infrastructure as code?
Yeah, I think it's kind of been, it feels like a natural evolution because, you have that kind of original. I remember putting my first product in the cloud where we used a checklist, and then, the first thing of moving to that infrastructure as code for that kind of declarative way of having consistent environments and everything was a step forward. But I think, as organizations grow and scale, there's a lot of repetitiveness, and I think that that's where really the kind of evolution towards platform engineering has come, because you can have predefined infrastructure that's available on demand, that's already vetted and secure and has all the right checks and balances in place. And I think that's kind of where that evolution has grown, and it really allows that kind of flexibility for the developers, I think, because they can get certain things off the shelf, access to, say, a Kubernetes environment or a VM or whatever it is that they know is secure and meets all the organization requirements and has the right networking. And then maybe they layer on some of the things that are specific to their application. Maybe they pull in a queue provider or a database or, and again, they're kind of almost using those composable Lego bricks and gluing them together, knowing that they're already secure and they don't have to focus on all the complications around making sure that they're well governed and well built, because there's somebody whose job it is to do that, and they're experts in that, and they make sure that it meets all those requirements. So, like I say, overall, I think it's an evolution, and I think it is very much a thing that happens as organizations start to scale up. That kind of, let's not repeat ourselves, the old coding acronym of being dry. I think that applies equally to infrastructure and infrastructure as code.
Thank you. That's a great insight. And Jackie, it's good to see you with us here. So with kind of as we've seen how cloud architectures evolved, the impact of platform engineering, and then how have the tools themselves evolved. So we many years ago we were talking about kind of initially only about configuration management because we had those long-lived VMs and that was the thing back then. And then we moved to infrastructure provisioning and a more declarative approach rather than procedural. How has infrastructure as code evolved from the days of, early days Ansible, Puppet, SaltStack, and all of those things?
Yeah, no, this
Uh,
this is
uh,
something. Oh,
no,
go ahead.
so I wasn't sure who.
Sorry, it was for Jackie. Sorry.
Cool.
Yeah, no, this is super interesting because it's a transformation that my teams are going through right now. Just the configuration itself, really foundational, absolutely needed for having that source of truth for what does production look like, but it hasn't really been sufficient. On top of the configuration management, we're seeing that we also need the automation and orchestration to push out changes, to do different types of change management, whether it's small from doing like fleet management or bigger like upgrades and things like that. We're also finding that we need like a really trusted test environment where we can validate some of this automation, configuration, how all the tools interact with each other, how production interacts with the changes we're making. And it's come much more beyond just the configuration as code and in Puppet or Ansible, and it's becoming more of like, how do we build a consistent platform and roll out changes?
Okay, so infrastructure as code is kind of becoming more of a first-class citizen rather than a collection of scripts that we kind of use to run here and there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's also becoming, managing infrastructure is also becoming software engineering.
Yeah, yeah. And we still have a huge amount of tools, and there are multiple flavors. You can go with open source, you can go with self-managed, you can go with cloud-based. Hila, how can we best approach kind of selecting the right tools for our needs?
I would say it really depends on what the tool offers you in terms of which use cases it supports, but also we always need to think about total cost of ownership. So not only dealing with the tool itself, but how much time and human resources we will need in order to manage those tools. So for example, once you go deep and understand that this tool is better for the use case, but that tool maybe is easier to manage and you don't need to have this overhead of managing it all the time, then maybe you prefer to go down this road, because we will always have trade-offs, and this is something that we need to consider. So I would say it's a bundle of amount of resources you have to dedicate, amount of like the scale that you have, and how much time you need to invest in it, generally speaking, and of course the expertise of the people that you have. If you only have organization that is composed of developers, maybe the way to go is Pulumi, because Pulumi allows you to write infrastructure as code in a lot of different programming languages. If you do have system admins or DevOps engineers, then maybe Terraform is the way to go, because HCL, which is the language of Terraform, is very easy to learn, and the ecosystem at this point is so vast that you can literally find not only a lot of use cases and a lot of Q&As answered online, but a lot of courses. So it really depends on where you need to invest your resources.
Okay. Thank you for that, Hila. Although a HashiCorp ambassador, you also talked about other tools as well, so thanks for that.
I'm trying to be objective.
Yeah. And at this point, I would like to ask the audience again to keep on submitting questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom. And we're gonna keep on coming back to those questions. And Martin, we talked about kind of all of those different tools, different types of tools, and this is an ever-changing landscape. Whether we talk about the CNCF landscape of tools or like more kind of traditional infrastructure as code tools, and this we often hear about development teams talking about increased cognitive load. And how do you see developers feeling about kind of owning their infrastructure, owning all of those things, versus just outsourcing it to another department within their company?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because I do think it's mixed. I will talk a little bit about the specific and the general, if that makes sense, because I think in general, developers like to develop code, and they don't necessarily like to build infrastructure. They want to solve the problems that they're tasked to solve in the software that they're building, and not necessarily build that infrastructure. But there's always some who just love doing everything, right? They like to have ownership of the whole thing. But I think in general that's the case. And I actually saw a stat recently that was saying that most developers, engineers have to like context switch between manage up to 14 tools as part of the software development lifecycle, which is just extreme. So, anything that can be done to reduce that cognitive load and make it easier, I think really helps. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying in the last question I answered, which is really around those kind of, out of the box standard golden pathways type infrastructures that allow, speedier deployment of their applications because they're working within a framework. I always believe that, you should give the engineers freedom to innovate. So I always like to think of it as they have freedom, but they still have some guardrails in there to be able to manage that. But yeah, I think, overall, I think engineers are quite happy for that to be outsourced. I know certainly in my previous organization, we had hundreds of development teams, and the number of development teams that actually wanted to own their infrastructure was a tiny percentage. Even when we were giving them the opportunity to do that, they basically would just come back and say, no, you do that for us. We'll just tell you what we want. We've got these other problems to solve, so you solve that one for us.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And what you said about freedom, but with guardrails, kind of ties to your previous answer about kind of platform teams and having templates that are going to help you be on Rails and help you move faster, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And most platforms now, will provide some governance too that says, hey, you can do this or you can't do that. You are allowed to provision machines up to this size in your dev environment, but anything bigger than that is not allowed. You are allowed to spin up this new technology, but within a specific space because it's not moved into the platform yet. And so you're giving them the freedom to build the application using the infrastructure that they need, but within constraints. And on top of that, as you were saying, the infrastructure that they're building, it's going to have had the right checks and the security, compliance, governance, auditability, all of that is in place so that, if you're in a regulated environment, you can absolutely make sure that when, where, how it was tested, is all part of that kind of progression of the application into the infrastructure and how it was deployed and kind of, the infrastructure that's there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks for that. And now that Martin kind of gave us the number, we know that roughly we need to learn how to use 14 tools. Jackie, how would you go about working with your teams to help them learn how to use those 14 tools and apply the best practices and so on? How can you stay ahead of the curve with learning and evolving?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what Martin was saying about having appropriate guardrails because every time we try a new tool, figuring out where the boundaries are, what's like a safe practice, what integrates well with our system, what, works in theory, but works differently in actuality. That's sort of like the first step. And then we start with writing it down, like having a architectural design decision. But over time, that knowledge gets lost too, right? So if we don't bake in the guardrails into the tooling, into code, we can't really expect that people are reading all the documentation before diving into things. And over time, that gets lost. It's interesting. Like one of the things that we've been trying to do is look for a workflow orchestration tool, for instance. And we went through many trials with different open source tooling, also try to build our own. And we actually landed on using Temporal as our workflow orchestration layer. But for sure, it's a learning curve. Like we start with a small proof of concept, expand it beyond the team, and before we can adopt more and more use cases and wider adoption, we also have to make sure the remainder of the team has stake in it and feels invested, has the appropriate like support and training. I think we gravitate towards tools for which they are concepts that are already familiar to us. So even the tooling and implementation might be slightly different, like the basic foundational concepts are familiar, and that we gravitate towards tools that already fit well with our ecosystem, so with other programming languages or other tools that we use. But one of the things that my team is trying to do is like, how do we have a community of practices around new tools that we're interested in or tools that we are starting to adopt, that other teams in the companies are starting to adopt, that people in the community are starting to adopt. You kind of have to try it out and like use it to learn. And we have to carve out space to do that. And then we have to acknowledge that sometimes these proof of concepts don't succeed and make an active decision that, okay, this is maybe not the right tool for us at this moment.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jackie. And since we talked about guardrails, we talked about kind of best practices, and there's this phrase I keep on hearing in every room I walk lately, which is CV reporting, software bill of materials. We kind of hear this all over the place. And I think I say you're the right person to answer that. There's this huge increase in attention about kind of securing our software development lifecycle. What is the impact on increased security and compliance needs for kind of infrastructure as code tooling and practices?
Let's talk about how security evolved a little bit. So in the past, traditional way was that we would have patching processes, right? Some processes around patching. With the modern way of developing in applications and architectures, bringing that sort of traditional mindset in would be very difficult both for security professionals and as well as developers and DevOps engineers and platform engineers. Why? Because not all vulnerabilities are exploitable, and not all vulnerabilities that are exploitable are reachable. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to look at it in two different schools of thought. A little bit like what cloud people say is let's talk about security in infrastructure as code, right? So how can we utilize infrastructure as code in order to achieve security? And that is we ensure that there are checks available within our code that identifies any insecure configuration that we are provisioning within our cloud hosting platform. So that is sort of a given. There are some tools out there that people can use, like the likes of Chekhov, TFSec, etc. They come with their own problems. False positives are always the problems that we need to deal with, but they provide good value. The other one is embedding security within our pipelines and CI/CD pipeline and software development lifecycle, that we identify these vulnerabilities. And that brings us to security of IAC, right? So we also will have dependencies that we'll be looking at within our infrastructure as code. So are we aware of those dependencies? Can we trust those dependencies? How can we identify the vulnerabilities that exist for those dependencies and the versions, and how do we deal with updates? Do we actually make the decision of going with an update, which may then introduce other vulnerabilities, right? So it's quite a complex in itself, a couple of panels sort of subject looking at vulnerabilities, but getting that information as early as possible is definitely key. And the other one is signed and verified artifacts. So as much as possible, if we can sign and verify those artifacts, have a trusted repository registry where we pull the artifacts, then it will make everyone's job easier in order to manage this from the very beginning. So how controlled is it in a way that doesn't block any team, any developer, the platform engineers themselves? And then we also will need to look at the pipeline security and the platforms that it sits on, and how do we deal with our version control, and do we have logging, etc. Some of the other security checks that we can look at as well.
Mm-hmm. So we have evolving security needs, evolving infrastructure as code needs, evolving cloud architectures. How do our teams evolve with that? How do we see the organizational chart of our engineering departments change as this has changed, Hila?
First of all, I think that we can't have a panel without throwing the word culture here. Because it's always relevant, and especially in platform engineering, there's the saying, if you build it, they will come. No, they wouldn't, because you have to make sure there is a dev enablement culture and concept already in the organization. And also you need to make sure that, and a lot of people talk about it in meetups as well about platform engineering, that if you gotta have a product manager, because you need to approach the platform as it's like a regular product, and think if it really fits your use case, fits your clientele, let's say, which are the developers, because if you don't solve their pain points, they wouldn't use the platform, and then you can invest all you want in the guardrails and security and everything, and no one will use it. So we have to think about the customers always. And then how it evolves, it really depends on the pain points. If the pain point is that we have a lot of scale and we need to scale very drastically and we don't have the necessary measures to do it, then we need to approach that. If we don't, maybe scale is not the current challenge, then we don't care about it. And then the emphasis will be about creating a better MVP if it's a very early startup, or delivering more features on the product. And then infrastructure is not the focus at the moment. So it really depends where is the company at in terms of business needs and the goals. And then the organization, in my experience, should be developing according to that. Because if you don't need to think about scale, don't hire a massive, or not even a massive, like a team of platform engineers or DevOps engineers, because you have a way to go until you get to the point that you actually need it.
Mm-hmm. And we've gone through a journey of how we've evolved our practices. So I think it's time for us to try to answer the question of, is infrastructure as code still fit for purpose? Is it the silver bullet for scaling engineering teams? And I would like us to go around the virtual room and answer this. I would pass the microphone first to Jackie.
Yeah, no, it's not probably not a silver bullet, but it is like foundational, like I said. So without it, it's again, like without this primitive, the way that we were working without infrastructure as code was like a lot of manual toil, a lot of like inconsistencies, changes that weren't maybe auditable or documented. So I think infrastructure as code is not a silver bullet, but still absolutely critical and foundational, and is part of an ecosystem of strategies and tools to manage automation and like cloud architectures, and yeah, changing environments.
Thank you for that. Next up, Hila.
Well, as a DevOps engineer, I would say a definite yes, because I try to remember what I did beforehand. I vaguely remember manual things and creating a lot of YAMLs by hand, and VMware and ES6 and all those things. And it was a very different world. Without it, if you'll take my infrastructure as code, I don't know what I'm gonna do to you. So definitely something that I would still want to have in my tool chain, because it helps me wherever. Because infrastructure as code is no longer just VM machines. You can create literally everything, all sorts of infrastructure with code. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. So yeah, for me, it's the way to go.
But as a DevOps engineer, don't you miss the days where you used to use a terminal emulator and open 100 windows on split view to try and run one command on 100 servers at the same time?
No.
Okay,
Wait, let me think about it. Let me think about it. No.
okay. I'm very glad the answer is no. So I said to you, is infrastructure as code still fit for purpose? And is it also a golden bullet?
I would say very much so. It's still fit for purpose, as in it is the core key enabler and then some. So you need that and then some in order for it to be successful in the purpose for which you're using. So as we are evolving with the ways of working, and applications are being developed, where they're hosting, the interconnectivity, and the technology advancements as well. Obviously, we're going to need infrastructure as code as the basis plus other skills. So learning curve for a lot of organizations, they still are finding it difficult to get the right skill sets to make it as efficient as possible. But yeah, it's definitely fit for purpose, I would say.
Perfect. Thank you. Martin?
Okay, well, I would say yes, it is definitely fit for purpose. I do think the sophistication level of what we consider infrastructure as code has dramatically increased, and we've actually heard it throughout this throughout this kind of panel today, because the requirements that have been mentioned around security and everything else that are now part of that. And there's other requirements that often come up as part of that infrastructure as code journey, that are not around security, but I know maybe cost governance and a whole bunch of other things that fit into different regulated environments. So I think yes, absolutely. I think it's been described as foundational, and I think it absolutely is. It's definitely an enabler for scaling up. But I think the skill set and the requirements around building really good, reliable, repeatable infrastructure as code has definitely increased too. I think it's not, you asked me earlier about, do developers like to do it? And some developers do like to do it, absolutely. However, do they think about all the things that need to go in that versus somebody who is dedicated to that role and building it? I'm not so sure. Because often developers just want to get it the fastest, quickest way. And I think, the way organizations ultimately succeed is make it really easy for the developers to do the right thing. So make it easy for them to use those well-designed, infrastructures, make it easy for them to adopt them, and make it really hard for them to do the wrong thing so that they just don't want to do it. I'm not going to try and get into the Google or the Amazon or the Azure console and try and manually create it, because guess what? I don't have access. I can only view, right? Just make it easy for them to do the right thing and adopt those things, and really hard for them to do the wrong thing. And I think that's the way that you help your organization scale. There is things about building trust and everything, but ultimately that is the goal. And I think, looping all the way back, it is, yes, but it is just a much more sophisticated and dedicated role than it used to be.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And as our panel is coming slowly to an end, I would encourage everyone to either use Slack or Zoom's Q&A feature to interact with the panel, add any questions you would like us to address. I would also like to thank our panelists for some great insights. I've already kept some things that I'm gonna take with me. First off, infrastructure as code has changed into going from just some weird scripting that someone does to proper software engineering, to being a first-class citizen. It is also part of a broader ecosystem. I like that idea. We integrate our infrastructure as code with GitOps, with our observability system. So it's not just one thing that works independently, but it's part of the big picture. And I also like the insights about how infrastructure as code integrates nicely with our platform strategies, in order to keep infrastructure as code dry, as Martin mentioned. And last but not least, I liked Hila's comment about thinking of total cost of ownership. We often think about what does it cost to buy it, and then what does it cost to get started with it, but we don't think about what something costs to maintain and be with it in the long term. So that's always something we should have in mind. I heard recently a quote that said, we think about day one and day zero, and those usually we have to face those one time, but we don't think enough for day two, because day two we are gonna probably face day two hundreds of times. So probably maintenance and day two operations is something we should care about. Thanks again for all the good insights. We'll be heading over now to the Lead Dev Slack. In the technical strategy channel, please head there to continue the great discussion. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.